hopefully it works. Whoa, let's see. I'm going to go over Lab Day 5, the presentation. So first, we're going to talk about the coronary arteries. This is something that we will refer back to. First of all, when you see the coronary arteries, the first thing that I think it's useful to identify is the LAD. So the LAD is indicated right here very helpfully. The key with the LAD is that it branches off of the left coronary artery and then goes straight to the apex of the heart. So you can kind of see these coronary arteries and the branches outlining a rough view of the heart. And this is viewed in the standard way of images, with our right being patient left. So we can see the heart oriented towards patient left, with LAD branching off the left coronary artery going straight to the apex, as we see here. What you really need to worry about in this image is the LAD, the left coronary artery, as well as the circumflex artery. For the purpose of imaging, according to Hunter, you don't really need to worry about the marginal branch, this AV, or the diagonal branch off of the LAD. So just left coronary artery, the circumflex artery, and the LAD. So remember that the LAD is coming up and down the anterior portion of the heart. In this angiogram, it's hard to tell because we see all the vessels at once, but the coronary artery is looping back behind the heart, okay? So it is going back behind the left atrium, and here this branch that we don't really need to worry about naming is supplying that atrioventricular sinus, the sinus between left atrium and the left ventricle. So LAD goes straight to the apex of the heart. Coronary artery has this kind of hill-shaped kink in it, and that is when it's looping back behind the heart. So telling the difference between LAD and the coronary artery, LAD has kind of like a suspicious looking bump over here, but we see that it is going straight to the apex, whereas the coronary artery, you might want to think that it's going to the apex over here, but it's really meandering, whereas the LAD is not. This is another good picture. Maybe it's a little bit clearer here, but again, we see the left coronary, we see it branching, and the LAD, again, is going more or less directly to the apex. And in this image, it's pretty nice. We can see the faint shadowy outline of the heart here, and this over here is the apex of the heart. Again, the left circumflex has this little hump when it's looping back behind the heart, so that is how we identify the left circumflex. Okay, now we're looking at the right coronary artery. Notice that it's a lot simpler looking than the left coronary. Here we just see it looping again back behind the heart to become the posterior descending. Remember, it's the posterior descending in the majority of the population. In left dominant hearts, the posterior descending comes off of the circumflex, or the marginal branch of the circumflex, or the AV groove branch of the left circumflex. You're not going to need to label that radiologically. But here, just note the right coronary artery, you're not going to see as many branches as you're going to see with the left coronary artery. Some really cool videos. Okay, so going through here, this is kind of a review. Just try to go over in your head what the top arrow is pointing to. So I'll give you a little bit of time to think. Top arrow right here pointing to. That is the arch of the aorta, aortic arch. And the next arrow is pointing to what? That is the ascending aorta, okay? And again, here we can see the apex of the heart contacting the anterior portion of the chest wall and the base. And can you guys tell me what chamber makes up the base of the heart? The base of the heart is made up by the left atrium. Okay, so here we are looking inside the thorax, and just try to think to yourselves whether we are high or low in the thorax, and how do you know? So we are high in the thorax, and the way that I like to identify this is by this bony landmark right here, which is quite large. Try to think to yourselves of what it might be. This is the manubrium. And we can see the clavicles coming off of the manubrium. So we know that we're fairly high. Another thing is we don't see any heart in this white box. The heart takes up a lot of space if you're scrolling from the head downwards. So we're not seeing the heart. That means we are above the level of the heart. We see the manubrium. So what we are seeing are all these vessels coming off of the heart. Oh. Need to erase all of this stuff. So this image is a zoomed in image of what we were looking at earlier. Everything is labeled, so I think we'll go back and look at this and just try to identify some structures. So I think it's easy to start with the more obvious landmarks. Let's look at this guy right here. It's dark inside. It looks like a big air-filled space. What is a big air-filled space that is high up in the chest and looks like it's right in the middle? That is the trachea, okay? So then we can think, what is directly behind the trachea here? That is the esophagus. The esophagus runs right behind the trachea. Here we don't see any lumen, and we can't always expect to see a lumen in the esophagus. It is this muscular tube. It lets the food down. It's not this big open space like the trachea, so we might or might not see a lumen in the esophagus. Okay. Then why don't we take a look at these vessels up here. So these vessels are very anterior in the chest wall. We're above the level of the heart. So let's try to think what these vessels could possibly be. Okay, you might be tempted to say that this one over here is the superior vena cava. However, we're above the level of where two veins are going to merge to form the superior vena cava. So this is not the superior vena cava. I mentioned two veins that are going to form to merge the superior vena cava. And what I have arrowed out right here, those are the two veins merging to form the superior vena cava. So what are those two veins? Okay, so the one on patient right is the right brachiocephalic vein. Okay, the one on the left is the left brachiocephalic vein. Okay, and we know that up at this level in the chest, those are the vessels that are running most anteriorly. Okay, so then we have these. They're not entirely distinct in this image. It's a little hard to see that they're separate circles, but we have these three circular looking things that are posterior to the left brachiocephalic vein. So what, as a group, what are these three things? I apologize if that's a weird question, but these are the vessels that are coming off of the aorta. Okay, so if you remember, we have the arch of the aorta, and then we start to have some arteries coming off of them. What is this artery here? This is the first thing coming off of the arch of the aorta. We know that because as the aorta comes up, from the middle of the heart, it's coming up. it's going to be looping back down this way. So over here, you know, imagine the ascending aorta, the arch. This would all be on slides further down towards the patient's feet, but the aorta would be coming back and this way. So this circle that I have here is the first artery coming off of the aorta, and that is the brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, ABCs, aorta, brachiocephalic trunk. So then that makes this our C, right? So that'd be the left common carotid. And then this guy also coming off of the aorta. The third thing, this is the S in our ABCs. This is the left subclavian. Okay, so just appreciate how we have the branches of the big main branches of the veins, the right and left brachiocephalic veins, passing anteriorly to all these branches that are coming off of the aorta. Okay, we'll take a look at the colored image. And here everything's labeled really nicely. Right brachiocephalic vein, left brachiocephalic vein. Okay, and then our three nice branches are BCSs coming off of the arch of the aorta. Okay, so this image is reviewed from before. What you should be able to do is go through and identify everything. Again, I think it's useful to orient yourself and identify maybe the more obvious structures first. So one thing I would look at is this over here. What is this structure that I've circled? That is the left ventricle. Note the really thick muscular wall that we have. Okay, this thick muscular wall that kind of is making a circle around the left ventricle. So if you're seeing a different slice of the heart, you know that the thick muscular walls are kind of encircling the left ventricle. Okay, so then that makes this here what? That is the intraventricular septum, the IV septum. Okay, other things that are a little more straightforward to see. If this is our left ventricle, then what is this big thing? This right here. That would be your aorta. You have your aorta coming off of the left ventricle. Okay, then your aorta is kind of coming back here. It looks like it's giving off this little guy over here. What is this coming off of the aorta? That, like we were just talking about, is the first branch off of your aorta. That is, this arrow is pointing to your brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, and we were talking about some vessels running in front of the branchings of the aorta, which is this guy over here that's very bright and white. We might be tempted to think that it's a bone, but that would mean there's this weird bone totally in the middle of the chest. You know, we're posterior to the sternum. There are no bones just floating around. So this is actually a vessel. It just has very high contrast. So what vessel is running in front of the splitting of the things that are coming off of the aorta? This is the left brachiocephalic vein. We can see it going to the left. We know that the left brachiocephalic vein is going to meet up with the right brachiocephalic vein and form the superior vena cava. Okay, so this little smidgen over here that's being pointed to, that is part of the superior vena cava. Okay, so we said this is the superior vena cava. Then what is this arrow pointing to? That is the right atrium. Remember, the right atrium is making up the right border of the heart. So when you're looking at things on imaging, the right border of the heart is going to be where the right atrium is. Okay, then what is this arrow pointing to? That would be the right ventricle. Remember, the right ventricle makes up a lot of the anterior surface of the heart. Here we're far enough back that we're starting to see left ventricle also, but we also see this nice right ventricle leading into, right atrium leading into right ventricle. So this right here is the right ventricle. Okay, this one's a little bit trickier. What is this arrow pointing to? What is this? That is your pulmonary trunk. Okay, we can't see it connecting to the right ventricle, but we've seen other slices in lab, and there should be other slices in your Core 40 images where we see this really nice connection between the pulmonary trunk and the right ventricle. So we've moved a little bit back from when we're going to see this arching over and front, but you should know by relationships that your pulmonary trunk does come, off of the heart anterior to the aorta, but then it kind of dives back. So we're seeing the diving back portion of the pulmonary trunk right here. Okay, a couple other straggler arrows. This guy is pointing to what? That is the left hemidiaphragm, okay? This guy over here is what? That air-filled space in midline is your trachea. And all these things are now showing up. So all the labels we're going to go through. Trachea, the next arrow down is your brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, do we remember what the vessel going in front of the brachiocephalic trunk is? That's your left brachiocephalic vein. Okay, I think the next arrow is the one below that. That is your aorta. Big guy coming off the middle, coming off of the left ventricle. The next arrow is your pulmonary trunk. Remember, coming off, you'll see it to the left of the aorta as it comes off of, it comes up in front of the aorta and then dives around to the left, like so, and then later we'll see the branches into the pulmonary arteries. Okay, so pulmonary trunk, then the IV septum, right? Left ventricle, left hemidiaphragm. I think we'll move over to the superior vena cava. The arrow below that is the right atrium, and then the right ventricle. Okay, so you should know, you should be able to label this angiogram. This, without the colors in, which is a little bit more challenging, but we know we have this giant arch, and we're seeing some of the neck up here. So in terms of vessels that make a giant arch, there's pretty much only one thing, and that's your aorta. So then we just have to identify the different things that come off of the aorta. We know first our ABCs. So we know that first we have a brachiocephalic trunk coming off. Okay. The next thing that comes off, and we see it here, is our left common carotid. And then we have our left subclavian coming off. In terms of other branches, if we're following our brachiocephalic trunk up, we see it's giving rise to the right subclavian that is going off to do its thing. We also have the internal thoracic, which we're just referring to as the internal mammary, so don't worry about internal thoracic. And then we have our right and left vertebral arteries. Okay. So this image is similar to something we've seen before. We're looking at a CT slice again. Let's start with structures that I think are a little bit more obvious. So right in the middle here, we have this air-filled space. It looks like we have, instead of one tube, remember we were saying one tube earlier, the trachea, here we're seeing these nice two circles that look like they're coming off the main tube of the trachea. So what is that? That is the carina. Okay, we're seeing the bifurcation of the trachea, so we'll call that the carina. And then let's remember what's right behind the trachea or the carina. This purple guy here is the esophagus. Remember, we're not always going to see a lumen, and that's running behind the trachea and the bifurcation of the trachea, and it continues to run down into the stomach. Okay, let's look at a couple other things. We have this giant circular thing right in the middle. This is a very key thing to look for. This is your ascending aorta, okay, coming right up the middle of the chest. So if we have an ascending aorta, we should see a descending aorta. Can you try to identify which shape is the descending aorta? So this shape right here, this, I guess, yellowish color, this would be your descending aorta. Imagine your aorta is going to make, its arch like this. And earlier we saw a higher slice where we didn't even see the arch of the aorta, but here we're a bit lower. We see the sternum, okay? So we're seeing the ascending and the descending aorta. Okay, we also see this green thing over here. It's kind of sneaking off to patient left. Let's stick in some of the names, but we have the ascending aorta. So try to think of what this green thing right here is. That's to the left of the aorta, to the patient's left, okay? And it's sneaking off a little bit to the left. This is your left pulmonary artery. It looks like we're not calling it pulmonary trunk because we have this part that's looks like it's starting to sneak off to the left. And if you remember earlier, we might see something more that's just more of a circle if we're still seeing pulmonary trunk. And remember that the pulmonary trunk is branching below the arch of the aorta. Okay, so we already talked about this orange shape, yellowy goldenrod shape. That's the descending aorta. Okay, let's remember what the purple thing is. That is your esophagus. And then the kind of blue outlined thing next, your carina. Okay, we see the bifurcation, so we're not going to call it trachea anymore. We're going to call it carina, and we're not seeing the left and right bronchi separately, so that's why we're calling it carina. And then last, this pink circle over here, something that runs to the right of the ascending aorta. That is the superior vena cava. Okay, and remember up higher in an earlier slide, we saw the right and left brachiocephalic veins before they met up to make the superior vena cava. Okay, here's another similar image. Let's try to run through it really quickly. And first think to yourself, is this higher or lower than this image right here? Just to orient ourselves, this image right here is lower than this image. And that is because the carina is gone, and now we see the air-filled tube-looking thing that is very clearly sneaking off to the left. We should see one over here. The image is not that great, so we only see the left one, but this would be our what? This guy on the left, sorry. This guy on the patient's left is a left main bronchus. Okay, so the carina is split, and now we're at the level of the main bronchi. Let's go around and name the different pretty colors. This guy over here is what? We saw it earlier here, and here we are still seeing it. That is the superior vena cava. The next arrow is pointing to what? That is the ascending aorta. Okay, and then we were talking about this green guy earlier. If we compare here to here, now we are seeing the pulmonary trunk that is splitting off into the right pulmonary artery, and we don't quite see the left pulmonary artery. Okay, but here, this is pointing to the pulmonary trunk because that is before it has made its split. Okay, the next one is this little yellow circle, and I think this tends to be something that we forget about, but it is passing under the left pulmonary artery. Remember, we're a little lower than the left pulmonary artery. This yellow shape is what? That is our left superior pulmonary vein. Okay, so remember that the pulmonary veins are coming in right underneath the pulmonary arteries, and they are plugging into the left atrium. We already talked about the next arrow. That is the what? The left main bronchus. Okay. The next arrow, that is the descending aorta. Okay, we see the ascending aorta in front. We should see the descending aorta in back. The next arrow is pointing to this purple region right here, which is the esophagus. Remember, that's running all the way down behind the trachea, behind the bifurcation of the trachea, behind the heart. And here we can see a little lumen, but we can't always depend on seeing a lumen. And the last arrow is pointing to something that we often forget about, that is showing up now, and that is the azygous vein. Okay, Here is another image, a different view of the heart. Let's try to identify some different things. So again, let's start at more obvious structures, hopefully. We can start down here. What is H? H is the right ventricle. Notice how it is coming up. We see a lot of this anterior portion. Okay, this H is the right ventricle, which makes E. E is the pulmonary trunk. Okay, this is the right ventricle. E is the pulmonary trunk. Coming off of the right ventricle. Okay, let's identify some more things. F. Notice the key location of F. F is at the base of the heart. It's coming in contact. Well, not really in contact, you know, we have the pericardial sac and everything, but it is the most dorsal portion of the heart, forming the base of the heart. So that means this has to be the left atrium. Okay. Then G is pointing to this structure right here. That is the aortic valve. I'll erase the pen, but you can very faintly see the leaflets of the valve. Okay. So then this B is pointing to what? B is pointing to the aorta. And then we have something coming off of the aorta, and then we have another little thing coming off of the thing coming off of the aorta. What is A? A is our brachiocephalic trunk. Ooh. Okay, and we know that the internal mammary is coming off here, so this has to be the brachiocephalic trunk. None of the other branches off of the aorta. Well, so the left common carotid just goes straight up to the neck. It doesn't have any things coming off of it that go back down into thorax. So A is the brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, if we're looking at C and D, we want to look at the color first, okay? There's this really dark area inside, which means it's filled with what material? It means it's probably filled with air. So if we're thinking of air-filled things that look like little tubes, these are going to be bronchi of some sort. I'm trying to erase this. Okay, I'm giving up on that. These are going to be bronchi of some sort. If we're thinking specifically of what bronchi, note that we're looking into the patient as if we're looking from kind of, if we're standing to the left of the patient and looking inside their chest. So we're looking over here at openings that are going to the right lung, okay? So the bronchi, since we don't see one, this is not a main bronchus, it's some branch off of the right main bronchus. And remember, in the right lung, the right main bronchus branches into two things that kind of have funky names that we don't really like. But C is the eparterial bronchus. Keep doing that. No. Yeah. Well, I don't know, it doesn't want me to write on it. C is the eparterial bronchus, and D is bronchus intermedius. Eparterial bronchus, remember, supplies the superior lobe of the right lung. Bronchus intermedius supplies the middle and lower lobes of the right lung. Okay, and that was the DMTA presentation from yesterday.